Hello, I'm Alan Todd and welcome to my arts channel. I've called the channel South Australia Arts Focus. Now that doesn't mean to say I'm going to be focusing solely on what happens in South Australia, but Adelaide is a capital city and there is a thriving arts community here, just as there is in every other city in the world. So this is a microcosm of what we can see and what we can appreciate. I've been an artist for 50 years. I've been a painter, a sculptor, a filmmaker, a writer, and I've produced somewhere like 40 to 50 contemporary dance productions, among other things. So I think I'm qualified to talk about the arts, what we should be doing with them, our place in the world, and probably the importance of the arts in terms of community. When you think of what's happening now, it may well be the arts that drives the economies back into life again after 9 months of COVID. As you can see, the studio is full of what I produce, and I am not alone. There are art studios in every corner of the world, and probably more so today than at any time in history, the world is full of art and artists. Where once being an artist was seen as the realm of an elite, it is now something for everyone to indulge in as a practitioner, with lessons in creating art all over the internet and advice for buyers of art. As an industry, it's full of potential. The question, though, is why we create art at all. What I'd like to do in this episode is to explore some of the reasons why we produce art in the first place. Because from the earliest rock art to jewellery made of jade to abstract paintings, we as human beings have always felt the need to create and believe that there is a purpose to this. One way of looking at art is to think about the purpose it has served. I'm not going to start with self-expression, however. It's basically a can of worms, but with more concrete ideas. The ancient Greeks saw art as a means of defining beauty, and the art has become one of the key elements of Greek civilization. We can say they succeeded. There is no confusion. The buildings on the Acropolis represent the high point of how to put up a temple, where proportions, use of materials, light and air all come together to suggest a higher purpose to life. Architects ever since have emulated that success in producing buildings that are both functional and things of beauty. Any walk around a modern city will show you all sorts of examples where people's lives have been enriched by being next to good-looking buildings and feeling a sense of pride. The number of tourists climbing the Empire State Building or standing back in awe at the Burj Khalifa or the compact beauty of the Sydney Opera House tells you how much such buildings speak to generations of people who may have no artistic pretensions. So one purpose to art, in this case architecture, has always been to give form to an idea of beauty. Of course, the ancient Greeks didn't just limit themselves to buildings. They sought beauty in the human form as well, and while the core and the kouros probably didn't resemble the average saggy human beings found in streets, it was something to aim for. Art as a record is something we take for granted. There are statues everywhere, and portraits of the rich and famous in national galleries and mansions. There are also monuments to events, such as a Roman triumphal arch to commemorate the victory of a general, or a wall honouring the dead, or an oversized wheel left over from the Millennium celebrations. In some way, they all became art even if they weren't conceived that way. Of course, kings, emperors, dictators and despots have all tried to use art to glorify themselves. Some survived, some didn't. Art as power is nothing new. Art as politics is also nothing new. All of those portraits of powerful people are political, as is Delacroix and Mother France climbing over the barricades of revolutionary Paris. Around World War One, we see the poster that aims to persuade people to take up the cause. And they did. National pride becomes a political weapon. By the same token, the stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals were teaching devices. In a time of illiteracy, images of biblical happenings were powerful tools. The church maintained its hold on the general populace by reminding them of what would get them into heaven or have them sent to hell. It was one thing having a priest railing at you from the pulpit, but a picture was worth any number of sermons. We need not be quite so taken with political power of stained glass windows or posters these days, but a piece of cloth can turn into a flag or a uniform and off we go. Fabric design has always been a powerful tool. While some of the past still lingers in terms of why we produce art, much of the impact of art forms such as statues or stained glass windows has been overtaken by the moving images of TV, the cinema and YouTube. Does it still have the same power? The fact that millions subscribe to Netflix and Stan, billions tune into televised sport and watch nature documentaries, doesn't detract from the lesser numbers attending blockbuster touring art exhibitions, or having people hanging paintings on the living room walls. The Marina Abramovich performance piece, The Artist is Present, attracted some 800,000 people to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and a collection of French Impressionist paintings had people queuing up around the block outside the Louvre. Art takes different forms for different people. If you can't make art yourself, the next best alternative is to be in a room with art and to hope that something rubs off. Of course, there is that art that the majority of the population claim not to understand, can't fathom why anyone would pay $1 million for, and certainly wouldn't hang on their walls if you paid them. What is it? Well, you could call this art the art of ideas. As soon as you hear of a term like cubism, installation, or even impressionism, you're in territory that anyone before about 1860 wouldn't understand. This isn't art with a purpose. It doesn't commemorate dictators or royalty, it isn't a search for idealised beauty, and it doesn't stand in the landscape looking important. It also probably wouldn't start a revolution, well, cartoonists notwithstanding. So what is it and where does it fit? Such art is about how we perceive the world. Do we all see the same thing? Well, yes and no. A person looks at a pile of bricks and sees bricks. Another sees a pattern, and still more feels somehow cheated. How can this be art? Ironically, this Carl Andre work was on display in 1976 at the Tate Gallery in London, and alongside it they were exhibiting a retrospective of Gainsborough, a thoroughly respectable painter. There would still be innumerable houses around with a copy of the Hay Wain over the fireplace. But in his day, poor old Gainsborough was a laughingstock. How can this be art, they said, in chorus. One phrase you'll hear continually is self-expression. We've come to believe that all artists have something to say. In fact, everybody has something to say, and they should be allowed to say it. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to like what artists produce, or will come to grips with a banana taped to a wall, but it does mean that art is a value in itself, and artists should be respected for what they bring into the public sphere. Of course, there are those who are convinced that their contribution to self-expression will outlive them. The evidence along railway embankments, on concrete supports and fences may be a perpetual eyesore, but you can't blame the artists who want to leave their mark on the world. Cave painters did it. Napoleonic soldiers did it. And while spray cans will not have the longevity of initials engraved in stone, graffiti merchants do feel the need to contribute to the cultural perspective, even when society is somewhat less appreciative. In some ways they are the Gainsboroughs, the Impressionists and the Carl Andres, and I guess the Basquiat's, because if he can succeed in being a street artist to a mainstream artist, maybe anybody can. I'm Alan Todd and welcome to my arts channel. Now I've called the channel South Australia Arts Focus. That doesn't mean I'm going to focus only on what's happening in South Australia, but Adelaide is a capital city, and like any capital city it is a microcosm of what is happening in the arts across the world, and there is a thriving arts community here.